Thank y'all for having me this morning. I'm first giving honor to God and all the people that organized this great event and the people that came out and thought it was It's kind of ironic that he mentioned Freemanstown, because that's where my seed was planted with historical documentation, was Freemanstown. And Camp Logan, believe it or not, that's where it all happened and went down. That's where it started at, was in historical Freemanstown. On the morning of August the 23rd, a young lady by the name of Mrs., they called her, most times you'll see it say Travers, but her name is actually Travis, because there's no documentation in the 1917 Houston directory that has anyone by that name of Travers that lived in that location. But there's a Miss Travis that fits the description, and she had 5 kids. That morning she was ironing in her home, and 2 officers came in looking for 2 teens that were on the corner gambling. And so they just burst into her home. She was half clad, they call it clad, meaning that she didn't have on that much clothing. And she was home, it was hot. Remember August, this is a hot day, it was very hot. And the location where she is called Golf Link, which is no longer there. You can still find it up on a map, but it's no longer there. There are apartments there now. And it opened up to the street of Tippinson. And that's where they had her, drug her out of her home and had her out on that street. There was a soldier that came along, his name was Alonzo Edwards, Private Alonzo Edwards. And he asked Officer Starks if he could take her, that he had the money in order to pay for whatever her fines was. But the climate back then was a very bad climate, which they thought, and can't say African American because that was not the terminology, it was colored and Negro were the terms that was used to describe African Americans back then. Negro and colored. But they like to use the N word. And so it just is what it is. They thought their value was less than $5. That's what they thought of them. Starks was an officer that lived in Fort Bend. And if anybody know anything about convict leasing, that was very a practice back then in order to re-enslave Negroes and colors. If you didn't have a job, they would arrest you and make you a convict, and they would put you to work. And so that in Fort Bend, there was still a lot of plantations. So his mindset was a terrible mindset, and the Houston Police Department mindset was a horrible mindset. Much like what people are picketing today to say our history, that's the history they're trying to bring back, that bad history. Houston has not really embraced the history of Camp Logan. It's kind of been swept under the rug, because in order to get Camp Logan here, Houston petitioned to get $2 million to have that camp built here during World War I. And that's the time. World War I is a really key turning point in our history. African Americans were not allowed to fight for America. That's why they fought for France. They were denied that right. So I have a book, and it's called Camp Logan. And I've seen many, many documentations on Camp Logan, and people have written many, many articles. But some of the facts are lacking, because when you do research, you have to go back to the source. And some people just didn't go back far enough. So on that day, military police, they had reached an agreement with Houston Police Department, the rail system, and the commander at the post that black soldiers, during that time, they would patrol and regulate black soldiers. But the police department did not acknowledge them because of that climate. They did not acknowledge them and said, we don't have to listen to you. So when Corporal Baltimore came along, Edwards yelled out to him, say, do I have to go with them? Because really, he should have been released to Corporal Baltimore because he was a military policeman. But one thing in that agreement in Houston that they did was they decided to disarm the soldiers. So the soldiers their weapons were replaced with billy clubs provided by the police department. That's all they had, and that's all they had to protect themselves. So many people can say whatever they want, but it was a hostile environment. Anyone that's been in the military know that was a hostile environment, and they was put in a hostile environment. But we talk about historic Freemanstown, that was one of the places that they frequent, because it was everything that you wanted to do to be able to go down there. The soldiers were based off Washington Avenue, This is actually a picture of what's there now and the roads that actually run parallel around it. So you can see what's there now, okay? There's not much that's left in that community. So let me tell you a little bit about what I do so you can understand the concept of the book. What I do is research African American settlements 150 years after slavery to see what's still there. And this is just happened to be one area that I researched, and it wasn't really necessarily part of African American settlement, but it was African American history. So I bridged the past with the future. And why do you say, do you bridge the past with the future? Because the present is ever changing. It's ever changing. Nothing is the same. As fast as you can go and take a photo or go see something, it's gone. So they're just wiping out all the history across the city. My driving force to do anything or to research Camp Logan is because I always seen documentation said 118 soldiers that was prosecuted and 13 hung. But no one ever gave those soldiers their name, which their honor was taken away from them, first of all. You know, your name is your identifier, that's who you are. That was taken away from them and put with a number. So I wanted to know who those soldiers were. Then we say 13 soldiers. Sometimes you can see their names and find their names, what their names are, but it was actually 19 soldiers that was hung all together. 19 soldiers hung. So where we get back to Corporal Baltimore, they start shooting at him. He runs away, he goes into Freemanstown, and it was called San Felipe District. That's the name of it. That was the name of it back during that time, San Felipe District. Now it's called Historical Freemanstown, and it's been called that for quite a while. So he runs away and go and hides under a bed inside Freemanstown. They drag him out, beat him, take him and arrest him. And actually, the place where they took him, the jail was on Capitol and Bagby. That's where the jail was. So now you know the location where the soldiers was marching to. So they beat him, and then Captain Snow was actually the commander. And he wasn't a new commander. He had just got promoted because the other commander left, so he was in charge of the base. They finally got him back. He sent one of the officers to go get him. Finally got him back. But the soldiers, people would have you to believe that the soldiers just went and started raiding and getting weapons. But the reality is that a white mob was coming. And what they did in the moment of fear between life and death made a decision, because Sergeant Henry had just told the captain that he was going into town with some friends and to be careful because something might happen. You don't just change from that and decide to tell men, fall in line, get your water, let's go. It just doesn't happen like that. So one of the research afterwards, one of the evaluations for one of the HPD officers, the Houston Police Department officers, said that the rounds that were fired into the camp and many of the homes outside the camp and some of the people that were injured came from weapons that were not military weapons, which means they came from civilian weapons, which is a clear indication that a mob was coming and they were fired upon. And that's what happened in that split moment for him to make that decision to say fall in. The officers have continuously failed them. Part of their job as being an officer is to protect your troops and to provide them a safe environment. So a lot of people will argue and tell you that they disobeyed a direct order. And I would say that they reacted as any reasonable person that's faced with that situation of life and death, and they acted to either die there or die fighting. And that's when they start marching down Washington. And as they came upon people, people were killed, all different places. So the other thing that I wanted to know is, where were they killed? Where did they shoot in those houses? So I researched and found all the houses that had bullet holes along the way, and I researched and found all the names of the people that actually got injured or killed that was involved, because it's just not a black and white thing. The story is a full story that happened 100 years ago. So that was my driving force. So when you have those type of elements that's your driving force, you're going to dig a little deeper, because you're not just going to find it on the surface, and you have to go to that. one of the biggest misconceptions they tell you is that Sergeant Henry killed himself. Sergeant Henry did not kill himself. Sergeant Henry was found with his head bashed in, badly bashed in by a blunt object. His weapon had been taken, and I just read somewhere the other day that they said that children found him. Children did not find him. A National Guard troop on patrol found him. That's how he was found. And they're the ones who called Sid Westheimer, which was the coroner, to come out. Okay? He came out and got the body. So that was the initial review of the bodies, was with Sid Westheimer, which was the coroner at that time. So they examined the body and told you exactly what happened. And they had to sign a sworn statement that that's what the body looked like. Now, in some investigations later after the fact, Chamberlain says that someone told him that 6 National Guard soldiers were, I guess they were talking about that they had killed a soldier and wounded one other. So my assumption is that those same soldiers that called him in are probably the ones that killed him. But there's not anything that really tells you that I've seen that anybody's written that that's how he died. And that's because in the court papers, they start changing the narrative and put a gunshot wound. If he had a gunshot wound, somebody did it to him after the fact. It wasn't before the fact. Not only did he have his head bashed in, but he had a 5-inch stab wound in his clavicle, and it was drug over to his heart. So either one of those wounds could have killed him. That's how deep it was. They stuck it in and drug it over, either with a bayonet or a knife. That's how he died. Okay? So they're marching on the city. They kill several people as they're going along the way. Their route goes down Washington, then it goes to Shepherd, all the way in. Never once did they ask anyone that was involved in that initial encounter with Miss Travis for them to come and testify, or any of the eyewitnesses. All the eyewitnesses were white or soldiers. White or soldiers. So there's a big clash that happened right at the corner of Wilson and what they call West Dallas. It used to be San Felipe. Right there in that intersection, police officers and soldiers died. That's where a lot of people died when we talk about police officers. That's where that clash is. If you drive down West Dallas and you get to that point, it'll click, because you know what? Mrs. Travis stayed right across the street from that area. So all in that little area right there is where a lot went down. Okay? So after that, the aftermath, everyone's dead, and you had 4 soldiers that got killed. And then you have several civilians that were killed, injured, some other military that was there, because military was coming in. They weren't the only soldiers that was there. There was other units that was here also that had come in because they had built part of the camp up enough to have troops coming in. So it was a lot of people here. So after that, where we get to the aftermath and they're leaving, as far as coming back, they tell you about a discussion that they had on the railroad tracks where they all marched back, and Sergeant Henry said he wouldn't go. They split up into 3 groups. One group went back to the base. One group wanted to go, still continue to march on the town, and the other one just wanted to be out. So they went three different ways. And then the next day, they pulled all the soldiers in, and some of them was found, one was found at 1220 Robin Street. That's where they found one soldier. That's the only one I could find an address that they actually was found. The rest of them was in different places throughout the forestry area that was there, because a lot of it wasn't built up yet. So they found them all throughout the way. But it's funny because Captain Snow had said all leave, everything was shut down, but some soldiers were still in town partying. So you have soldiers all over, so you have no accountability. There was no accountability of those soldiers. That's why no one really knows who did what. Some soldiers, yes, I believe you could identify because they were the leaders. But a lot of the soldiers just got caught up just because of the color of their skin and because they weren't accounted for. They had over 140 soldiers that was placed on guard duty every day. And so when they pulled them in and talked about head counts, they They looked to see if they were signed in at certain times. If you wasn't on there, then automatically you're guilty. But you really didn't know because some soldiers was in town. They were supposed to be going to Emancipation Park. If you don't know about Emancipation Park, that's a historical park. They were going to have a watermelon party for them. That's what they were supposed to be doing that day, with the Chamber of Commerce, and then the military was going to have a watermelon party. But all of that was canceled after all that happened. So we get to the point where we are now, where we're talking about, I told you quite a few key things where I told you that Trevor's name is Travis. I feel pretty good about that her name is Travis rather than Trevor's. Told you about Sergeant Henry, that Sergeant Henry was not killed by a gunshot or killed himself. Because you have some people say, oh, he was killed by homicide with a gunshot, or he killed himself. Those two myths are not true. That's because if you go back to the initial inquest, and look at the initial documentation, you will see in writing how he died. It tells you. Some people have just gone to the court documents, and that's where the narrative changes in the court documents. Okay? Sergeant Henry, Private Watson were buried in Memorial Park Cemetery right here off West Dallas. This year, today, they're unveiling, 100 years later, their headstones in those parks. I had the opportunity to actually go to Buffalo Soldier Museum when they initially received those items in. And so just to witness them opening up the box and seeing their names on it 100 years later, I can't even explain the experience, because a lot about what I do is about discovery, exploration, and the experience to be able to see those things. Just recently, I had opportunity to go to San Antonio, and those soldiers that we're talking about, the 19 soldiers, they were buried in unmarked graves with a bottle, with a typewritten note with their name, rank, and the date that they died in it. And they just put like number plates on it, 1 through 19. They just had number plates on it. That's how they was buried. So between 1934 and 1937, they start removing those bodies and put them in Sam Houston National Cemetery, which were the first African Americans to actually integrate that cemetery. That's kind of weird because their bodies up near the front. And so they're in that particular area. And so I had a chance to go see them. 2 of the bodies were turned back over to their families. The other 17 bodies are there. The bodies are lined up between Corporal Baltimore on your right and Jesse Moore on your left, and all the other bodies are right in between them. They're lined all up in a row. And they do not have their rank on it. It only has their name and their date of death. That's on there. So their honor was taken away from them. When you take someone's birth date, their sunrise, and the dash, you've eliminated really their life and just said they died. And then you take away the military honor was their rank. But really, when you look at the information or the certificate that was requested for those headstones, they could have put that on there. But you had someone that took it upon themselves to write and say what they didn't want on there. My thing is that I don't believe it was a riot. I don't believe it was a mutiny. I believe it's what anyone would do when faced with death in that situation, that we all will react. If you don't react, you will die.